Wonderful, everyone. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. We are grateful to be presenting today's conversation in partnership with our friends at the Japan Society of Boston, a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to promote cultural and economic ties and active interchange between Japanese and Americans for mutual understanding, benefit, and enjoyment. They serve as a programming nexus for a network of individuals, institutions, and businesses that are linked together by a strong interest in Japan and a shared recognition of the importance of the U.S.-Japan relationship. I encourage you to explore their website and all of their exceptional programming. As we continue on today's conversation, I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you'll purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today, I have the great joy of introducing Sarah Frederick, here to introduce today's very honored guests. Sarah Frederick is a professor of Japanese literature at Boston University, with additional affiliations in women's, gender, and sexualities, and cinema and media studies. She received her BA from Harvard University and PhD in East Asian Languages and Civilizations from the University of Chicago. She specializes in gender, media, and literature, and is the author of Turning Pages, Reading and Writing Women's Magazines in Interwar Japan. She is currently writing a book about the author Yoshie Nobuko, one of modern Japan's most commercially successful authors. She has also done a digital mapping and translation project about Nasume Sosuke's trips in Kyoto. And now, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Pierce, for the introduction and for giving me the honor of introducing these wonderful speakers and celebrating the exciting release of the English translation of another novel by Mieko Kawakami, who is surely one of the most important writers in Japan today. It is especially an honor to do so at an event sponsored by one of my very favorite bookstores, one that is so important to the Boston and Brookline area community, and one also frequented by my students at Boston University. Those of you coming from around the world, I hope you will visit Brookline Booksmith if you come to the Boston area someday. First, we have with us tonight Mieko Kawakami. She is the author of the internationally best-selling novel, Breasts and Eggs, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and one of Time's Best 10 Books of 2020. I've been recommending this book to so many people who all thank me for it afterwards. The translation by Sam Bett and David Boyd is excellent and beautifully brings out the various voices from different age, class, and regional perspectives that Mieko Kawakami herself brought to life in this remarkable novel in its original Japanese. The audiobook based on that translation is also amazing in distinguishing the types of narration, and I really recommend that as well. I just love this book so much that I experienced it in both ways more than once. Her work being available in English has really opened up the possibilities and diversity of what we can teach in courses about Japan and what the public can read from contemporary Japanese literature. In addition to Breasts and Eggs, Mieko Kawakami is the author of the highly acclaimed Heaven, her second novel to be translated and published in English, and which Oprah Daily described as written with jagged, visceral beauty, which it is. The author now lives in Tokyo, but she was born in Osaka, Japan, and made her literary debut as a poet in 2006. In 2007, she published her first novella, My Ego, My Teeth, and the World. Her works, known for their poetic qualities, their insights into the female body, and their preoccupation with ethics and modern society, have been translated into over 20 languages. Kawakami has received these most prestigious literary awards, all named after similarly important authors that came before: the Akutagawa Prize, the Tanizaki Prize, and the Murasaki Shikibu Prize. It is also my honor to introduce our moderator, Dr. Anna Zielinska-Elliott. She is my colleague at Boston University, where she teaches Japanese language, literature, and translation studies. She's the founding and current director of our MFA program in literary translation. She is a renowned translator of modern Japanese literature into Polish, best known for her many translations of Haruki Murakami. She has also translated Mishima Yukio, Yoshimoto Banana, Mizumura Manae, and Tanizaki Junichiro, one of the writers whose prize Kawakami has been awarded. In addition, she's the author of a Polish language book on gender in Murakami, a literary guidebook to Murakami Haruki's Tokyo, and many articles on European translation practices related to contemporary Japanese fiction. She is really the perfect person to guide our conversation and reading with Mieko Kawakami tonight, where we'll be talking about and celebrating her newest release in English, All Lovers in the Night, again translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd from Europa Editions. It has already been named a most anticipated book of 2022, and I too am looking forward with great anticipation to tonight's discussion. Finally, I want to mention that interpreting for Mieko Kawakami this evening is the brilliant interpreter Mary Joyce. Thank you very much, and we'll get our program started now.
よろしくお願いします。
こちらこそよろしくお願いします。
お願いします。
Mieko-san, thank you very much for taking the time today to talk about your most recent work with readers here in Boston. We are very sorry that the pandemic has made it impossible for us to host you in person. As a big fan of your writing, I'm very happy for this opportunity to talk to you today. Your newest book, here it is, All the Lovers in the Night, appeared only last week from Europa Editions. I really enjoyed it. And I'm hoping that maybe we can start by asking you to read the beginning passage from the book, the one that starts with, "Why does the night have to be so beautiful?" And then later we will ask Sarah to read it in English.
はい。じゃあ、冒頭を読みます。真夜中はなぜこんなにも綺麗なんだろうと思う。それはきっと真夜中には世界が半分になるからですよと、いつか三塚さんが言ったことを、私はこの真夜中を歩きながら思い出している。光を数える。夜の中の光を数える。雨が降っているわけでもないのに、濡れたように震える信号機の赤。連なる街灯、走り去ってゆく車のランプ、窓の明かり、帰ってきた人、あるいはこれからどこかへ行く人の手の中の携帯電話。真夜中はなぜこんなに綺麗なんですか？真夜中はどうしてこんなに輝いているんですか？どうして真夜中には光しかないのですか？耳を満たすイヤホンから流れてくる音楽は私を満たして、それがすべてになってしまう。子守歌。ピアノの美しい子守歌。素敵な曲ですね。そうですね。ショパンで一番好きな曲です。冬子さんも気に入りましたか？ええ。まるで夜の呼吸のようです。溶かした光で鳴っているようです。昼間の大きな光が去って、残された半分がありったけの力で光ってみせるから、真夜中の光は特別なんですよ。そうですね、三塚さん。何でもないのに、涙が出るほど綺麗です。ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. 本当に涙が出るほど綺麗ですね。So, can Sarah now read the same?
Yes, I don't think I can do it justice, but it's so beautiful. Why does the night have to be so beautiful? As I walk through the night, I remember what Mitsutsuka said to me, because at night only half the world remains. I count the lights, all of the lights of the night. The red light at the intersection, trembling as if wet, even though it isn't raining. Street light after street light. Taillights trailing off into the distance. The soft glow from the windows. Phones ready in the hands of people just arriving home and people leaving. Why is the night so beautiful? Why does it shine the way it does? Why is the night made up exclusively of light? The music flows from the earphones, filling my ears, filling me. It becomes everything. A lullaby, a gorgeous piano lullaby. What a wonderful piece of music. It really is. It's my favorite piece by Chopin. Do you like it too, Fuyuko? Yeah, it's like the night is breathing, like the sound of melted light. The light at night is special because the overwhelming light of day has left us, and the half remaining draws on everything it has to keep the world around us bright. You're right, Mitsutsuka. It isn't anything, but it's so beautiful that I could cry.
Thank you, Sarah. So, Mieko, could you talk a little about the role light plays in this
ま
novel?
ず光の役割についてお願いします。
The book begins and ends with light and
小
darkness.
説は光と影から始まるんですけれども、
そうですね。この小説を書くときに考えていたのが、小説を書くときはいつもいろんな要素が、いつも考えているいろんな要素がこう集まって一つの物語になっていく過程はどの小説も同じなんですけど、
Yes, when I was writing this novel, the things that I was thinking about, of course, it's the same with any novel, but there are many different aspects, many different thoughts that come together to form the story, the narrative.
で、この小説書くにあたって物理学の先生のところに講義を受けに行ったりとか、あとそうですね、校閲者の方に取材をしたりとかしていて、その時にこの冬子さんがやってるその校閲の仕事の中で誤植は生き延びるっていう話があるんですね。どんなに注意深く見ても過ちのない本はないと。でそういった、誤植の存在と光の存在ですね。光っていうのは私たちこれ見ているのは全て残り物の色で、そういったものと人間の在り方、言葉の在り方、光の在り方、人間の在り方っていうのが私はすごく響き合ってるように思って、すごくそれが象徴しているなというふうに感じました。
And in the process of writing the novel, I actually went to hear lectures by people, specialists in physics, for example, to learn about this light and so on, and also to speak with many proofreaders, as the main character is a proofreader. So within that time, in all of these conversations, thinking about Fuyuko, the main character, as a proofreader, one of the things which really remained with me was the fact that no matter how closely you check, in every book, there will always be errors remaining. There will always be mistakes that survive. And this is the same for any book that exists. And this is really something that can be said that I was thinking about when I was writing this, thinking about errors, thinking about light, thinking about the fact that light, what we see around us, the different colors we see around us, is the light which has been absorbed and remains behind there as well. And the same thing could be said both for humans, for words, for light. And these were all things which I think very much resonated together and were very symbolic in the process of writing this book.
Thank you. So I loved all the light passages, but I have another scene that is, I think, my favorite scene in the book. In chapter 5, when the main character goes to a bookstore, looks at the shelves, and realizes that none of the books speak to her. They all describe lives and expectations of women that seem to have nothing to do with her own life or with her.
そうですね。あそこの、冬子は、カルチャーセンターにも行きますし、書店にも行くんですけど、そこで、いろんな講義の名前とか、いろんな講義をこう見るんですね、カタログで。で、あとその書店でもいろんな本見るんですが、あそこの本のタイトルっていうのは全部こう私がフィクションで考えるんですけど、あれを考えるのはすごく楽しかったですね。どういうタイトルの自己啓発本とか女性についての本。でもそれがね、全てから招かれていないというか、全然そこに、自分にこうリレーションするものがないっていうのがどんどんこうね、人だけじゃなくて本からもそのように感じてしまうというシーンだと思います。
Yes, I think it was brilliant, and I wanted also to say that
if I can just translate that, I'm apologize.
I'm sorry.
So yes, indeed, there is the process of writing about going to see the bookstore, and there's also the scenes where she's looking at the names of different courses that she can take in the catalogue of what's called a culture center as well. And of course, all of these titles of both the courses and the books are all things that I thought of myself as fiction, but the process of inventing all of these names was something that was very fun, actually. These names of these self-empowerment works, of these works about women for women, and the fact that none of them were inviting her, none of them were relating to her. So this is not only human relationships, but also even books coming up in that sense as well.
Right. So the scene also indirectly reminded me of the time in Japan when in some bookstores, books by women authors were used to be put on separate shelves from books written by men. Nowadays, I'm sure much has changed, and it seems that many of the best contemporary writers in Japan are women. What do you think? Why do you think that is? Or does it seem that way to us in the States because of what gets translated to the English? And how much does it have to do with more Japanese women finding their literary voice?
そうですね。すごく女性作家は、なんだろう、たくさん読まれています。それで、そうですね。でも、私がこの仕事に就くようになったのが2007年、8年ぐらい。だからちょうど12、3年前なんですけど、その時にはもう、例えば、日本はまあ文学賞がたくさんあって、新人賞も含めると結構あるんですけど、その選考委員にも女性は就任していましたし、たくさんいましたし、そうですね、この10年ぐらいは本当に女性の活躍が目立ちます。
Yes, indeed. There are many women writers who are very widely read. And since I've been working in this career, it's been since around 2007, 2008, so around 12 to 13 years. Looking at this, I think already at that time when I first set out, there were, for example, within the different many Japanese literature prizes, including prizes for new writers, many women already on the selection committees and already many women involved in the field. But I think we have seen more progress in this in the past 10 years.
ただやっぱり今でも文学ってすごく書くだけじゃなくて批評も大事ですよね。それがどのような社会に意味を持って今どういう文学的な方針があるのかっていうことも同時にやっていくためには批評っていうのはすごく大事なわけです。その批評家たちは圧倒的にやっぱり男性が多いんですね。非常にもうほとんどもう 95% が男性で占められているので、そこはやっぱりなかなか解消されないですね。そうすると文学賞などのジャッジっていうのは女性の、ジャッジを受けるんですけど、批評っていうもう一度こう社会にどのような、リリースされるときにそこにやっぱり女性がいないというのはちょっと歯がゆい気持ちがあります。ただやっぱりなかなか構造的にね、批評家が女性を育ちにくいっていうことがやっぱり今も感じられます。
But while that is the same, of course, within literature, it's not only the process and the act of writing, but also literary criticism has a very significant role to play there as well. What way literature is being read in society, what kind of literary trends there are, and so on as well. And within this, in the field of literary criticism in Japan, it's still overwhelmingly dominated by men. I would say around 95% of critics are indeed still men. That's something which there has not really been much improvement in as well. So while there are many women acting as judges in these literary prizes and so on, when the literature is then released, goes out into the world, how it's accepted by society, read by society, and so on, is indeed something which is still very much dominated by this literature criticism. And there are many different structural difficulties at play, which has meant that it's difficult to have more women in that field.
I see. Okay, so I have another question about being a woman writer, because three of your novels, a novella, and several short stories have been published in English so far. And I think in the United States, owing mostly to the success of Breasts and Eggs, you're perceived by many readers as a feminist writer. Your characters, your female characters certainly break all kinds of stereotypes and live defying societal expectations. In the newest novel, one professionally successful woman says, like, if you make plenty of money, but don't have any kids, you might get called successful. But unless you have kids, no one will ever call you a great woman. And you yourself said in an interview that when you were starting out, your image of feminism was hysterical old women on TV. But as you got older, it seems so obvious for women to be feminists. So I'm just wondering, how do you feel as a feminist writer? Or do you feel you're a feminist writer? Because some people might argue that that label is empowering and others might say it's limiting. So I wonder what you think about that.
私は小説と書き手の関係っていうのは非常に基本的に幸福なものだと思っていて、作家は好きに書くので、書きますよね。そうすると、読み手はもう好きに読んでもらえれば、それが本当に一番の関係だとまず基本的に思っています。
First of all, fundamentally, I believe that the relationship between writer and the reader is something where, of course, the writer is in a position that they're able to write whatever they like in their work. And then it's also up to the reader to then read as they like from that work as well. This happy relationship, I think, is the best way that it should be between the two.
で、だからブレス&エックスがフェミニズム作品であるとすごく女性にそれももう全然大歓迎ですし、本当にいかように読んでもらっても私はすべて歓迎したい気持ちでいます。
And so for Breasts and Eggs to have been read or perceived as a feminist work is something which is, of course, very welcome to me. But any way that the book is read is something which I would welcome.
で、私は個人的にはフェミニストです。その自認があります。世界は本当に女性にとってもっと良くなるべきだし、本当に私たちはどんどんエンパワーメントしていって変えていかなきゃならないというふうに思っています。
And personally, I do identify myself as a feminist. I think that we need to have a world which is better for women. We need to create this kind of world. We need to have more empowerment for women, and we need to make change.
ただ私はフェミニズム小説を書くフェミニズム作家ではないと思っています。そこは全然デフィーツしないというか成り立つんですね。というのは私はやっぱり世界個人一市民として世界に対して良くなってほしい、例えば母親として女性として人間として良くなってほしいという気持ちと同時に小説は世界を必ずしも良くするもののために存在するとは思ってないからです。
But as to whether I define myself as a feminist writer writing feminist novels, that is not necessarily the case. And I don't see that there is an issue there. As a citizen, as an individual, of course, believing that the kind of world I would want to see, a better world to see as an individual, as a woman, as a mother, is one thing. But then also within, I don't believe that necessarily novels have the role of needing to be working to improve the world as such.
だから私は本当にとにかくだからといって芸術がね全て無罪で何を書いてもいい、もちろんいいんですけれども、ただそれに対する器用方変ですね。作家が何を書いたかということは作家にもわからないんです。その作品が一体何を最終的に読み手に影響を及ぼしたかということを作家は極端なこと言うと自分が何をやってるかということは書いた後もわからないんですね。
But that doesn't mean, of course, that there is, no responsibility for art or that art does not have a certain role to play. But at the same time, for an author, of course, after you have written something which is out there in the world, the author has no way of knowing in what way that will influence the reader, in what way that will be perceived and will live outside in the world in that sense as well. So in a sort of extreme way, it could even be said that once it is written, it is, out of the author's hands in that sense.
だから誰も今の時代の認識を超えて全ての時代に通じる小説を書くということは難しいと思います。でも 私たちは文学の最高の条件として、長く普遍的に読み継がれていくことに重きを置きますよね。でも私は文学というか小説の、もう一つの役割として読まれなくなっていくことにも意味があると思っています。
And of course, it's not necessarily, or it would be very difficult to write a novel which is not reflecting the period in which it is written, to write something which transcends the period, transcends the time, and would be read the same way for all ages. And at the same time, of course, when we are working in literature, we are, wanting to and seeing something good about something which is read for a long time and in a universal way as well. But I think another role of literature, of the novel, is indeed what happens when it stops to be read.
All right, so let me make a comment about my experience as a reader. I really like about your books that you don't tell the reader everything about your characters in terms of what has happened to them in the past, but we find a lot about their anxieties, depressive states, inability to function in what's considered normal society. So you keep your readers guessing. You answer some questions in the course of the book, but not all. For example, in the last book called The Lovers in the Night, we find out very little about Fuyuko. She's alone and seems to always have been alone. She says at one point, from a young age, I couldn't bring myself to contribute to conversations like a normal person, much less socialize or go out with anyone. And then suddenly, halfway through the book, she coolly announces, I had sex for the first time in my final year of high school. She then proceeds to describe that experience, and I don't want to reveal too much for people who haven't read the book, but we learned that what happened to her wasn't really having sex. We also find out very little about Mitsuzuka, who has been mentioned in that first passage, or about the two main characters of Heaven, Boku, and Kojima. So I wonder, I really like this, but I wonder if you write this way because you feel it reflects real life more faithfully. Do you feel that it's in fact very difficult to get to know other people?
小説は全てを、稀にものすごく何十巻という分量を費やしてほとんどの一生かけて、例えばプルーストの作家もいますよね。で本当にもう本当に書くということと人生というものを極限まで押し広めて表現という極まった表現というのもあります。でもそれでもやっぱり小説の中に全てを書くことはできない。この世界の全てを書き、全てを同じ光で照らすことはできないですね。これやっぱり時間の芸術であり、私たちが有限だからです。でもその中でも、私たちもそうですね、世界の全てを見尽くすことができない。で、隣にいる人、あるいは自分が生んだ人間であれ、生まれてきた、その、もともとの母体である母であれ、誰であれ、その人のことを、全てを理解するということはやっぱり原理的にできないのではないかと思います。でも、だからこそ、一瞬、分かり合えたのではないかという、それが錯覚でも、実感でもいいんですが、そういうものに意味が出てくる。で、切り取られた文章、この何百枚、何ページかっていう、この形態に意味が出てくるんじゃないかなというふうに思います。でも、やはり、でも、全てを書き尽くすことはできない、全てを見ることはできないっていうことを、諦めとして受け取るのではなくて、でも、もし書きたければ、そこに向かっていくっていう、ギリギリまで近接していくっていう意思っていうのは、作品のスケールに現れてくるとは思っています。
Yes, indeed. A novel is something, of course, which you spend, tens, dozens of hours working on as well. It's something that you can even spend, your whole life working and writing on a particular piece as well. And it really, in a sense, brings you to limits in one way there as well. But within a novel, of course, it's not possible to write the whole world, to portray the whole world. It's not possible to, shine the same light on all things which are being included within any particular work as well. This is because, of course, novels come to being a form of art which is connected to time, and that we, of course, have limits. Nothing is limitless in that sense as well. And the same thing can be said for us as humans. We cannot, of course, see everything in the whole world, even the person who is standing next to you. Even as a mother, you cannot know everything about someone, even if you physically gave birth to them as well. You cannot know everything in that sense. And so I think that this is why we look for those particular moments of mutual understanding, or when there is this sense of mutual understanding that comes out. And this can be within a novel, a particular moment, a particular scene which comes in there as well. But of course, the idea that you cannot write or see everything in the world, that's not something which means that you should, give up trying to do that. Of course, working toward that, pursuing that, if that is something that you want to do and put the will towards that, that is indeed its own possible endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I just want to make it clear that I really like it, that it's not all explained. So,
thank you.
Let me ask a question about translation, since as a translator, this is something I am very interested in. I would like to know if now, when you are well established as a writer in the States and Europe, are you more conscious of writing something that is going to be translated into English or perhaps other languages? Do you think that the fact that you're gathering a significant non-Japanese readership matters in terms of how you write? Do you ever think about it while you're writing?
今、日本でもこの間翻訳が出たんですけど、あらかじめ翻訳される文学についての本が出たりしていて、今やっぱりそこはすごく関心のあるイシューですよね。
So this is an issue which is of a lot of interest here in Japan as well. There is a lot more being published recently here in Japan about books which are newly being published, translated and so on.
でも私は例えば訳しやすいようにとか、ここは分かりにくいだろうなと思って意識することは一切ないですね。
However, when I am writing, I am not at all conscious or thinking about whether this will be easy to translate or this will be maybe perhaps difficult to comprehend. I don't think about that at all.
ブレス&X も私が全然1枚目を書く前にたくさん版権が売れていて、もうそれが出版されるということは決まっていたんですね。いろんな言語で。でもような作品になったわけです。大阪弁が出てきて、いろんな固有名詞が出てきて、大阪のローカルな添右衛門町ブルースとかっていうそういう音楽とかも出てくるわけですね。でも翻訳者は見事に英語に置き換えてくれましたね。
And so, for example, when I wrote Breast and Eggs, the new version of that in Japanese as well, already the rights for translation in various different languages had already been sold and confirmed before I'd even written a page actually at that time. And yet the work that I wrote in Japanese ended up being as it was, having these parts in Osaka dialect, having many different local Osaka place names, music, and so on coming up in that sense as well. So, it wasn't at all being conscious of the fact that it was being translated, but the translators did an incredible job of representing that in the translated work as well.
I am very happy you brought this up because I wanted to ask about it, but I hesitated because I thought that you probably had been asked about it hundreds of times already. But I am curious about Osaka Ben. Because when you read the book in Japanese, Osaka Ben, if you removed it, it would be a very different book, is how I feel, at least. But at the same time, the consensus among translators is that there's no good way to translate dialects. So it sort of gets lost, and I guess it's unavoidable. But from what you just said, it sounds like you feel that it wasn't, well, I don't want to say it wasn't such a big loss, but you feel that Sam's and David's translations that does justice to it, despite there being no dialect.
大阪弁の部分をどのように翻訳するかについては彼らとすごくミーティングを重ねたんですね。で、方言って何かっていう話になってくると思うんです。で、日本でも中央ですね、東京に対して匹敵する大きな文化の場所として大阪というのがあります。でもやっぱりそれ以外にはやっぱりいわゆる田舎っていうふうにあって、そこの方言ですね。だから東京に対する終焉のものに対する田舎の言葉っていう位置づけがやっぱあるわけです。
Yes, in regards to the Osaka dialect sections and how to translate them, actually I had many different meetings and conversations with the translators about how this should be translated, how this should be portrayed. And I think this comes to the question of what indeed is dialect, what does it represent? When it comes to Japan, of course, we have Tokyo at the center, and there is Osaka as one representative other location there as well, but there are also the many different dialects of the rural, regional parts of Japan, the Inaka, and the way that these are represented, or this is this relationship between Tokyo as the center and the regions on the margins.
それでやっぱりその方言を例えば表現に使うときにはその音を楽しむとかね、そこのコミュニティにこういう言葉がある以上の意味がやっぱり盛り込まれてくるわけです。東京よりも洗練されていないとか、例えばそういうなんていうのかな、表彰であったわけです。
And so when it comes to dialect as well, there is so much more to it. For example, how you enjoy the sound of it reads, or beyond the literal meaning of a word, what kind of meaning it has for that particular community, whether it's an expression that is, not as refined perhaps as compared to Tokyo language there as well. So it's about this representation in a way.
それを考えたときに、じゃあ大阪弁の本質って何かっていうと、大阪弁っていうのはもちろんダイレクトでは方言ではあるんですけど、方言であるっていうことに本質がないんですよ。
And so when thinking about what fundamentally is Osaka dialect as well, of course it is a dialect and it has this linguistic perspective, but that's not really where the core, the fundamental significance of the Osaka dialect is.
で大阪弁を使うその私の登場人物たちっていうのはやっぱりじゃあ何を表しているかっていうと考え方であり、例えばそのタフネスであり、こう辛いことがあっても悲しいことがあってもそれをすごく笑いでね、コメディで回収していったりとか、あとそのなんていうのかな、そのどちらかというとこうクラスを表彰する部分も多いですし、あとやっぱり気質ですよね。そういったものを表すものだというふうに3人で話していました。なので私は例えばトークショーに出ているジェニファー・ローレンスのバーっていうすっごいスピーディーな話を見たりするとすごく大阪的なものを感じるんですね。
And so within this as well, looking at the characters in my writing who are using Osaka Ben, Osaka dialect, thinking about what the fact that they're speaking in that dialect shows. It's a way of thinking. It's this kind of toughness. It's also the way that when things which are difficult or sad happen, they deal with this by humor, by comedy as well. And so in this sense, I think it's really looking at a representation of class and about the nature of these characters in this sense. So the three of us together with myself and the translators discussed this in a lot of detail. And as an example, I think that when I see on talk shows on television, when I see the actor Jennifer Lawrence speaking in her very, very, very fast way, to me, I really feel something very Osaka-like from that.
だから、なんていうのかな、だから大阪標準語に対して大阪弁、じゃあそのアメリカにおける、あるいはイギリスにおけるその都市の言葉じゃない、例えばマンチェスター語とかいろんな方言あると思うんだけど、そういうものを当てるっていうことでは全くないんですね。で、デビットとサムはそのマキコとその緑子と夏子が一体どういうふうな暮らしをしてきて、どういうものを食べて、どういうものに感動したときにどういう言葉遣いで話すのか、スピードですね。スピードとか相手を思いやる気持ちとかで面白いことを言うとか、そういう姿勢とかこう気質にすごく寄り添った言葉遣いで再現してくれたので、私は私の書いた大阪弁が再現されなかったというようなことは全く読んでいて感じません。
And so in that sense, looking at, well, how to show this difference between Osaka dialect and standard Japanese, of course, there would be the option of using a regional dialect from somewhere in the United States or the United Kingdom, using Manchester language, for example. But that was not the decision that we made. And David and Sam in the process were really thinking about the three characters in Breast and Eggs, Makiko, Midoriko, and Natsuko. What kind of life are they living? What kind of foods are they eating? What moves them? What kind of words are they using? And how the speed of how they're speaking to each other is, their relationship to each other in their conversation, and the kind of very funny expressions and so on that they're using as well, their stance, their nature. And so I think that in the translation by both of them, they really represent these kind of fundamental essence of what was within that dialect as well. So for me, I have no sense at all that the translation, as you're reading it, does not represent what the dialect was showing.
Thank you very much. That's a very good explanation. So I think we have time for one more question. And I would like to ask a question about Haruki Murakami. Because when I was reading All the Lovers in the Night, I noticed that Fuyuko really liked sharpened pencils, and she talks a lot about sharpening pencils, which obviously has to do with her job of a proofreader. And then those were contrasted with, or I felt they were contrasted, maybe that was just a coincidence, with the pens, the row of pens that Mitsutsuka had in his shirt pocket. And somehow the sharpened pencil brought Murakami to mind, because a lot of his characters like sharpened pencils. And that might be obviously a coincidence, and I'm sorry for this long lead up. But there has been a lot written about you and Murakami, because Murakami said you were his favorite young novelist, and you said in an article that you remember feeling like you had never read anything quite like it when you first read Murakami, and that you felt you could have read any given page forever. The writing was overwhelmingly fantastic. And then you also said, I'll never forget how excited I was to find out that novels like this existed. From then on, Murakami was a very special writer to me. And you also in another interview mentioned that the narrator of the story Sleep was the first woman in fiction you could truly recognize as a person. But then many readers here will have read your interview with Murakami, in which you confronted him about his portrayal of women. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about if you feel you were influenced by his writing, and if so, in what way? I know you mentioned that that you were influenced by his by the fact that you can change as a writer as you're writing over a long time. But were there any other things that you are aware of that you're doing like him or unlike him?
私は本当に村上春樹さんからすごい影響を受けてます。っていうのはなんだろう、2つの大きな影響があると思っていて、まずはもう本当に10代の初めの方から村上の本を読んでるわけです。だから読者として非常にまずその世界に馴染みがあるというか、読者としてまず影響を受けてますよね。
So I have indeed been very much influenced by Murakami Haruki, and there are particularly two large ways that I think that this has played. One is, of course, as a reader from when I was in my early teens, reading Murakami's works as well. And really his world is something which is so familiar to me. So the first influence is very much as a reader.
でまずそれから書き手になってから、それで彼の作品を本当に精読しています。非常に私は細かく読んでます。その中で彼がキャリアの始めから現在に至るまでどの段階で何を書くことができていったのかということを私は勉強しています。
And then as a writer as well, since becoming a writer, I'm reading his work, his writing in very thorough detail actually as well. And what I'm very much interested in is looking at what he wrote early in his career, and then as his career progressed, what he was able to write at different stages within that as well. That's something which I really study and learn a lot from.
だから彼を読むときに一人の作家が30歳からキャリアを始めて今村上さんは72歳。その時に一人の作家のどの段階で何が書けるようになり、どういうチャレンジがありっていうこの奇跡自体が私にとって本当にすごく意味を持つものなんですね。
And so reading him, seeing him, as a writer who started out around 30 and is now 72 years old, seeing how one individual writer, what they are able to write at the different stages of their career, what kind of challenges they have or challenges that they pursue as well. This progress is something which I'm really very interested in learning a lot from.
でそれは村上と2人のレイモンドとも言えると思うんですけど、彼がその海外本作家の何を訳した時にど 次に書いた短編にどういう影響があって、どういうものを書いてっていうことも順を追っていくといろいろこう見えてくるんです。で、それは本当に私は書き手としても読み手としてもそれをこう追体験するっていうことは素晴らしいことですし、それにはいつもその驚かされています。で、彼が三人称で、彼の一番大きな私が好きな変化は、最初からやっぱり彼はマジックリアリズム的なところから始まるわけです。それからアメリカ文学の影響を受けて、それでキャリアのちょうど、そうですね、10年目ぐらいの時にノルウェーの森っていうものを書くんですね。で、ノルウェーの森はいろんな、本当にたくさんの読者がついて、村上を本当不動の作家にした作品だと思うんですけど、やっぱりあそこで徹底したリアリズムで、一人称でリアリズムを書いたっていうことに私は非常に感動しますね。
And so looking at Murakami, his writing and his works, one other thing that you can see is also, for example, after he has just published a translation of Raymond into the Japanese, you can see then what influence that has on his next works as well there as well. Looking at the order and the process which comes there is something which I think is really wonderful, seeing how his experiences as a writer then come out in his work in that sense as well. That's something which is always astonishing and surprising for me as well. The change that I really like the most in reading in his works and watching this progression as well is looking at, while first of all writing mostly in the third person, or of course looking at his early works very much rooted in magic realism and with this influence from United States literature there as well. And then the book which he wrote after around 10 years, Norwegian Wood, there as well. Of course, this was a book which reached many readers and really brought him to be one of the leading writers in that sense as well. But this was really something which is very much grounded in realism and written in the first person there as well. This was something which was very, very moving, left a great impression for me.
Thank you very much. This was really interesting. I'm sure everybody has lots of questions. Let's open the floor to questions. Please put your questions in the chat. Okay, we have a question from Nicola Enrico. Maybe I should read it. As you are my favorite writer, I would like to know if there are any other translations of your books planned in the future. Yes.
あります。今、本当に日本の作家はね、想像を絶するぐらいたくさん書くんです。っていうのは、大学に属しながら、小説を書いてる作家もたくさんいるんですけど、やっぱほとんどはみんなフリーランスでやっていて、生活していくために書くっていう作家も多いですね。で、私は今、新聞連載っていう、これもまた日本独特の形態なんですけど、毎日小説がね、少しずつ掲載されるのをね、1年間ぐらいやるんですよ。それが今、10ヶ月目ぐらいに入っていて、1000枚ぐらい。だからブレス&エクスぐらいの風にもうすぐ書き上がるという、そういうスケジュールです。
Yes, indeed. Japanese authors have a tendency of really writing huge volumes of work, actually. Well, there are, of course, many writers who are working at a university as they're writing as well. The majority are working as freelancers. So in order to, of course, make a living to survive as well, we're writing a huge amount. What I'm working on at the moment is actually, this is something perhaps a little bit peculiar to Japanese publishing, but is a serialized novel which is being published in the newspaper as well. So this is something which over the period of a whole year, every day, parts of the work come out there as well. And it's now in around its 10th month as well. This is around coming up to about 1,000 pages of the work, which is around the same length as Breasts and Eggs.
So it has been just, I have just...
で、それが、書き上がってから、翻訳者に渡すことになると思うので、いつ出るっていうことはまだ言えないんですけれども、でも、短編集も出したいなっていうふうに思っています。
And just to add in regards to the translation, well, of course, that is still being worked on at the moment. Once I've finished this serialized novel, it will be handed over to the translator. So we're not sure when it will be coming out, but we are planning the translation of that. And I'm also hoping to be able to translate to be able to publish some short stories in English soon as well.
So I just realized that there are questions and the question and answer part. So I will move there in a second, but I see an interesting questions here. which is, I am curious what you see as a relationship to the I-novel form. What are your thoughts about its possibilities and limitations? And if there are writers of autofiction in other languages you admire?
いっぱいいると思います。海外文学でってことですかね。海外文学。でも、やっぱり日本はね、すごい、翻訳文学がすごく豊か、いろんな言語の小説が読めるんですよね。たくさん優秀な編集者がたくさんいて。でね、これからね、翻訳されるものですごく楽しみにしてるのはね、デボラ・レビーの本を楽しみにしてる。まだ翻訳されてなかったので、それがまず楽しみ。で、あと、いろんな、こうやって私、英語で翻訳された後にいろんな作家と出会うことができたんですね。シンポジウムもそうだし、こういうイベントもそうだし、その時に、ぜひその人の小説を読んでみたいということで、出版社の人にちょっと話をしてみたりとか、そういうつながりも出てきていて、現代作家には非常に興味があります。
Yes, indeed. In Japan, we're very lucky that there is a broad range of translated literature available. There are many great editors who are working to translate literature from other languages into Japanese. To say one author who I'm very much looking forward to reading, hopefully soon, who has not been out in Japanese yet, is Deborah Levy. Also looking at, after my work has been published in English, of course, I've had the opportunity in symposia or in events such as today to have the chance to meet with many great authors from other parts of the world as well, and in different conversations with publishers and so on, about really hoping to be able to read their work in Japanese as well. But there are many, many authors who I really very much admire.
All right, thank you very much. I see a fun question here. In Breast and Eggs, the main character's acquaintance has to go off and live in Wakayama Prefecture with her husband's family. I need to know, why did you choose Wakayama?
そうそう、友達ね、もっと一緒に働いていた友達が和歌山。そうそう、和歌山ってね、そうそう、和歌山ってでもこれさ、聞いてくれてる人ピンとくるかな。和歌山っていうのは大阪のね、南に位置する大きな県なんだけど、そうそう、和歌山ってね、なんで和歌山にしたんだったかな。そうそう、和歌山に引っ越しますって言われた時にあんまりイメージが近い、私大阪だから近いんだけど、どんな感じなのかなって不思議にちょっと思ったのかな。そうそうそうそう。
So as for why Wakayama, of course, there's the scene of her friend talking about moving to Wakayama. So Wakayama is a very large prefecture just to the south of Osaka. You have a sense of sort of what that means and so on. But in a way, Osaka, it's very close, but it's not really somewhere that you have sort of a very clear image of. It's a little bit vague in that sense as well. So that's sort of that relationship there, and looking at its proximity or connection to Osaka.
あとね、和歌山のことで今思い出したんだけど、八甲物語ってあるんですよ、日本の。英語でも、なんだっけ、ハチだったっけ、ハチっていう映画になったんだけど、あれでね、最後ね、犬が置いてかれちゃうわけ。家に。で、お父さん、八甲の、マスターが亡くなった後に、一家がね、パッと場面が切り替わって、確かね、和歌山ってなるんですよ、いきなり。和歌山ってなるの。で、私ね、その子供の時に、東京の話だから、東京から一家がもう和歌山に越したっていう時に、すっごい遠くに行ったんだなっていう感じがしたの、すごく。で、和歌山っていうと、私なんかすごい近い、大阪だから距離的には近いんですよ。でも、東京から遠いけどね。でもね、和歌山ってすごくね、近いのにすごい遠い感じがしたの。八甲物語で、と思って、和歌山行っちゃったんだと思ったの。それすごく多分関係あると思う。波がバーンってなって、そういうイメージがある。今思い出した。
And just after hearing this question, And I just remembered thinking about why Wakayama actually. There's the story of Hachiko, which has been, made into the movie in English about, Hachi the dog and so on as well. And within this scene, there is where, the dog is left behind at home and his owner. But then at the end, all of a sudden, the scene changes. And while they've been in Tokyo up to that point, the family, they moved to Wakayama. And I remember watching this as a child and thinking it's so far away. Of course, that was talking about from Tokyo to Wakayama, which is even further. But for even me as a child in Osaka, the distance should be very close to Wakayama, but it just seems like somewhere so close and yet so far away. And this scene in the film with the waves crashing and so on. I just remembered this when thinking about Wakayama after this question as well.
そういうイメージがある。
That's very funny, I think.
そう、なんかね、こうね、バーンって断ち切られるってイメージがあるんだよな。
There's kind of this image of this, sudden shift and then, standing there and so on as well.
あった。すごい、初めてされた。なんで和歌山だったのって質問。
That's the first time I've ever been asked why Wakayama.
Okay, how about this one? Does anybody ask you, do you listen to music while writing? Or do you have any favorite writing drinks or snacks?
します。もう私はあれですよ、聞かれるんですよ。執筆のコツは何ですかって言われるんですけど、2つあります。私本当2つあって、1つはもうちょっと書けるなっていうところでやめておく。もうちょっと書きたいと思うところでやめるみたいな。そうすると明日書きやすくなる。で、もう2つ目はこの小説のなんかねテーマ曲みたいなの決めとくんですよ。で、もう仕事場に来るなんか気持ちが乗らないなと思っても、とにかくこのマウスでその音楽を再生する。そうすると雰囲気が入っていって、自分が入っていってなんか書けるようになっちゃうんですよ。ムードで、外圧で押し切る。で、ということで質問に答えると、音楽はいつも聴きます。
で、リピートですか？
うん。なんかね、2つ3つぐらいテーマ曲があって、でね、シーンごとにもあるんですよ。シーンごとに。それをね、ブレス&エックスの時は、デビッドとサムとね、プレイリストをね、共有しましたね。この音楽、ここのシーンはこの音楽、これはこの音楽みたいな感じで。で、すべて真夜中の恋人たち、ラバーズは、もちろんショパンですね。ショパンをずっと聴いてました。なんか、子守歌、ララバイとか、なんか、再生回数みたいな3600回とかになってた気がするな。
Yes, I'm often asked what the trick to writing is in a way, and I think there are two particular things that I would share. The first is stopping writing when you feel that you can or that you want to write a little bit more. If you do that, then coming back to writing the next day, it makes it much easier if you stop at a point where you want to write just a little bit more. And the second comes to music. I always have a theme song for every novel, every work that I'm working on as well. And so if I'm coming into where I work, not quite able to get into the mood, not able to start writing, I bring up my mouse and click and turn on that music. And once I do, it always brings you into the mood to be able to work, to be able to write once again. It's sort of a form of outside pressure in a way as well. So to answer, yes, I always listen to music when I am writing as well. And then Anna asked if that is always being done on repeat, the same songs. And Mieko responded, well, there are 2 or 3 particular theme songs for every novel. And then there's also music which is accompanying or attached to each scene, different scenes throughout the work as well. And so, for example, I always have a playlist which is relating to the different scenes of the different characters and so on. And I share this with Sam and David, and we work on listening to the same music, saying, here is where this song comes up. And so for lovers, this is where Chopin, of course. And I think if I look at how many times I played Chopin's Lullaby, it's up to something like 3,600 times.
So let's do a quick question and then a more complicated question. So the simple question, will your essays be translated? I am a huge fan of your essays such as Kimi wa Akachan.
ありがとうございます。Thank you, ありがとうございます。エッセイはどうなんでしょうね。 時々文芸誌、アメリカの文芸誌とかに、あとグランダとかにも掲載されることがあるんですけど、エッセイ集をまとめましょうっていう話は今のところはないかな。まずはやっぱりストーリーでっていう風になってると思う。でもいつかそんな機会があるといいですね。うん。
Thank you for that question. In regards to essays, well, sometimes I do have essays published in US literary journals or in Granta, for example, but we don't have any plans at the moment for publishing more fuller essays. For now, I think we're focusing on translation of the stories, but I hope that there may be a chance one day.
Okay, this is a big question. Why do you write? Have you always wanted to write?
私は、全然、今私45歳なんだけれども、30になるまで文章っていうのはまともにちゃんとこう、フィクションというものを、まあ小説ですね、発表したこともなかったんですね。ただ、なんだろう、こう、今日、冒頭でお話ししたのと、やっぱりちょっと関わってくると思うんですけど、やっぱり、私の人生っていうのは、もう自分が一回性を生きてるっていうことはみんなと同じようで、私もこれ一回しか生きれない、本当にかけがえのないものなんだけれども、なんか小説とか文学でいうと、やっぱ細胞の一つじゃないですか。
So it hasn't necessarily always been the case. So I'm now 45 years old, and it wasn't until I was around 30 that I started to, write words as fiction, as a novelist in that sense as well. But I think it's connected a little bit to what we spoke about at the beginning. Of course, the same as everyone, my life and all of our lives, we have just this one precious, irreplaceable life. But when it comes to novels, I think it's something almost like a bit of, cells in that sense.
そうやって考えていくと、なぜ書くのかって別に私が書いても書かなくてもそんなになんか変わりはないんだけれども、なんかね、やっぱり描写がしたいんですよね。で、なんか、そう。で、描写がしたい。あと、子供の時に、私はやっぱりストリート出身だから、文学でお腹が膨らまないってこともよくわかってるんですよ。文学で貧困はやっぱりなくならないし、辛い子供たちは辛いままだっていうことも本当によくわかってるんです。
And while thinking about, why I write, perhaps there's no significant change in the world about whether I am writing or not. But I really feel a strong wanting to be able to, depict, to portray these different things, expressed in a sense as well. Of course, from when I was a child, I'm someone who, grew up, on the street in a way as well. And I've always known that literature is not something that you can fill your stomach with. It's not something that you can survive just on that as well. Literature is not something that will be able to eradicate poverty. It's not something that will change the situation of children who are living in very difficult circumstances.
でも本当に辛かった時にね、子供の時にすごく無力で辛かった時に、ただ水道からちょろちょろ流れる水がすっごく綺麗だったこととかね、あとなんか河原の光ってる感じがすごい美しくて、で別にその美しさでね、お腹は膨らまなかったわけなんだけど、でもなんかやっぱり自分とかこういうなんか辛さとか、なんか自分がなんていうのかな、大きなものの一部じゃないんだけど、なんか美みたいなもの、ビューティーみたいなものがすごくその時のが焼き付いてる。で、それが何だったのかっていうのはわからないんですよ。でも何かではあったんですね、私にとって。その美しさっていうのは本当にあの時生き延びるための何かではあったっていう、体験があるんですよ。
But at the same time, thinking back to, when I was a child or when going through very difficult times as well, I remember these moments, for example, of seeing water dropping from a tap and finding immense beauty in that one scene as well, or in a shining roof tile that's being reflected from. And of course, knowing these kind of things, these kind of visions are not things which will fill your stomach, but there are times when you're in your own pain as well, it can make you feel not necessarily part of something greater, but you can really see the beauty in these kind of moments. And I'm not sure what it is, but there is something in those moments of beauty, those visions of beauty, that has something in there giving the power for surviving in a way. And so I think those experiences are very fundamental.
だから私が書く理由は、そういう本当にものすごく辛い時にそういうものが一瞬光ったこと、それを思い出す、それを残していくっていう行為だと思ってます。
And so I think that the reason I write is so that when you are in these moments of intense pain, intense difficulty as well, to remind of these moments of such things shining through and to be able to leave these to remain.
I see. We have time for one more question, so I think I am going to connect two questions and ask you the last two questions here. One person asks, has parenting changed your writing style or your themes? And another person says that they loved Midoriko as a character in Breasts and Eggs and her way of communicating through diary writing. Is there a bit of you in that character?
緑子はね、本当にね、みんなが好きだって言ってくれるね。で、それ本当になんか魅力的だし、多分みんなのなんか、魅力的だって言ってくれるのは、多分何かみんなの記憶とか体験とかを思い出させるキャラクターなのかもしれませんね。
So I'm often told everybody really seems to love Midoriko. I'm always told by people how much they love her as a character. And I think there is something very charming there, but part of it is connected. I think she often reminds people of their own memories, their own experiences in a way.
で、親になってから書くものが変わったかっていうと、本質的にはさっき言ったような、やっぱりすごくサバイブの中にあるそういうエピファニーみたいな光に対するリマインズとして書くっていうのが大きいんだけど、でも、確かにやっぱり出産した後はすごくちょっと、今出産が終わって10年目なんですけど、やっぱりちょっとなんていうのかな、いろんなものが、デフォルメされてた数年間があったね。喜びもだし、悲しみもだし、なんか晴れてたような感覚がずっと、そういうのは確かにあったから、影響はあったと思います。
And as for whether becoming a parent, becoming a mother has changed my writing, I think, well, fundamentally, my writing is, as we've discussed, talking about these issues of, survival or these moments of epiphany through the light and these sort of larger themes there as well. But after giving birth, and it's now 10 years since then as well, of course, within that period, there are these various and, many there's pleasures, there's sadness, there's so much that comes with that as well. And so I think that, I must say, it does indeed have some kind of influence or impact on my work.
で、私は子供の時、一冊も本がないで育ったし、本っていうのが人が書いてるのは分かってたけど、自分と全く結びつかない世界からなんか世界にあるもので、読むけど、なんか全然自分が小説を書けるよとか、そんなことを30歳になるまで思ったこともなかったですね。
And I grew up in a household that didn't have a single book as well. I knew that there were books out there and that people were writing books, but it didn't seem to have any connection to my own world as well. Well, I did maybe read books, but the even idea that I myself could be someone who wrote books, who wrote words, was something which never occurred to me until I was around 30 years old.
でもね、そういうちょっとした瓦がちょっと光って見せたときに、うってこみ上げてくる気持ちとかさ、なんか、好きな人ができて、その人へのなんか思いとかあるじゃないですか。そういったものを、夜な夜なノートに書くような子供ではあったんですよ。書いてた。 ちょっとね。
But at the same time, these kind of moments where, you know, there is this, that you see a tile shining or reflecting and it brings up all these feelings in you, or, you know, you get a crush on someone and how you're feeling about them, how you like them as well. I was the kind of child who would always be writing or scribbling little notes and so on about these kind of things when I was young.
書いてた。やっぱりね、詩が、それが何かわかんない。日記なのか詩なのかもわかんないんですけど、よく書いてたし、あと私はバーホステスもしてたんですよね。弟大学に行かせるために4年間水商売をしてたんだけど、いつもその出勤する前に、喫茶店によって、そこで、日記書いてたね。うん。
And so as to what I was writing when I was a child, whether that was a diary or whether it was poetry, I didn't know, and perhaps don't know now, you know, what exactly that was, but I was always writing ever since I was a child. And I worked as a bar hostess for 4 years in order to send my younger brother to university. And during that time, before I would go to work, I would always go to a kisaten, to a cafe, and be writing my diary there.
で、そうそう、そこでまず書店に行ってね、いろんな本見てすごいなと思って、喫茶店に行って、読んで、で、ちょっとこう感想を書いたりするんだよね。それで、そうそう仕事に行ってた、その後に。よく覚えてる。
So my routine would be I'd go to the bookstore, I'd look at all the different books there, going, oh, wow, looking at the different things. Then I'd go to the cafe, I'd read for a while, and I'd write in my diary, you know, my thoughts about what I just read, and I'd go to work. This was my sort of routine there.
そうそうそう。
I guess we are out of time, so I want to thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to talk to you today. I hope the audience is looking forward to the new book and many, many more books to come. It was wonderful to hear about your experience, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And thank you, Mary, for incredibly excellent interpreting.
で、最後にね、本当にいろんな、本当にたくさんの国からコネクト、ログインしてくれて、本当にありがとうございました。それで、本当だったら今日、直接会えた読者の方もたくさんいたかもしれないけれども、本当に、こんなことになってごめんなさい。でも、楽しい時間を過ごすことができました。そして、素晴らしい、機会をありがとうございました。で、素晴らしい通訳はメリさんです。ありがとうございます。
And finally, just to say, you know, thank you so much to everybody who's connected from so many different places around the world for the event today as well. And for those who were, of course, looking forward to the opportunity to meet in person, I'm so sorry that that wasn't able to happen this time as well. But really enjoyed the time that we had to have this conversation together. And thank you so much for everybody who was involved in creating this wonderful opportunity.
And we do hope you can come soon.
Yes, we'll welcome you back.
いつかぜひ
もちろん、of course.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone so much. Yuko-san, do you mind coming on too? I'd love for people to see you and thank you as well. Thank you everyone so much. This is the great crew. There are a couple others too that helped make this event possible. So last minute with the pivot to virtual, and we are so grateful to all of you for joining us and for all of you who made this possible. So thank you, everyone.
そう。ありがとう。今、日本はね、朝の8時なんです。皆さんこれからいろんな人が寝る人もいると思うし、一日過ごす人もいると思います。でも、楽しい時間、素敵な時間過ごしてくださいね。ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. It's now just after 8 a.m. here in Japan. For some of you tuning in today, you're about to go to sleep. For some of you, you're starting your day. But thank you so much for this really enjoyable time that we've been able to spend together.
本当にありがとう。
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
ありがとう。メリーさん、ありがとう。